Chapter 28. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, goodbye. Blanked in darkness, their ears still jangling, Alex, Hazel and Rose huddled beneath the cardboard. You two all right? Whispered Alex. I think so, replied Rose. Hazel? There's a soft moan. Sure, I had better days, she sighed. And so have I, hissed Hex from the inky blackness of the orchestra pit. I think I've got scale chaferus the ram. In reply, there was a loud twanging noise coupled with the sound of horns entangled with musical strings. I'm here too, he muttered. Although in my haste to return, I appear to have got my hoof stuck in some sort of funny-shaped lyre. Guitar, corrected Rose. Ex-guitar, added Hazel, before breaking in a wobbly laugh that sounded close to crying. At that moment, the cinema flooded with light, and blinking, Rose wrapped her arm around Hazel's shoulder before turning to look at the stage. She gasped. Like an alien moonscape of gleaming rocks, mirrors stabbed every few centimetres of stage, splicing the wooden boards. As she watched them spangle in the light, Rose felt her heart begin to thump hard behind her ribs, realising just how vicious the curse had been. If she and Alex had only been a few seconds later... Shaking her head, she pushed the thought away. Beside her, Hazel glanced up and burst into deep gulping sobs before burying her face in her knees, smudged with stage dust. Come on, said Alex. He looked at Rose from beneath the cardboard cutout. Let's get this thing off us. Together, Rose and Alex gingerly felt for some shard-free patches with their fingers and slid the cardboard clattering to the floor behind them, before helping Hazel to her feet. Then, quickly glancing over to where the sorceress had crash-landed and seeing no sign of her, Alex jumped down into the orchestra pit to disentangle Aries from the guitar and took Hex back into his jumper. But Rose simply stood, staring out over the ruined auditorium, feeling rather like one of those marathon runners who crossed the line and promptly burst into tears. Her mind jumbled with astonishment that they'd actually saved Hazel, nerve-trembling shock at just how close it had been, and a fizzing dollop of relief. The sudden clatter of footsteps snapped her out of her thoughts, and she looked sideways, seeing Mitch Praline racing up the steps two at a time. Hayes, honey! He cried, striding over the stage, smashing mirrors beneath his boots to throw his arms around his daughter. The young singer sank gratefully into her father's embrace, looking more like a child, her spectacular pink dress no more than a dirt-streaked bodice attached to a miniskirt of frayed rags. Rose sighed, remembering her own father's bear hugs and how they always put anything right, and wished with all her heart that he was there too. Then, blinking back a sudden prickle of tears, she heard Alex calling her name. Meeting her gaze, he nodded towards the police, who were now running into the auditorium. We have to go, he said. There is no finer police force than HM London Constabulary. And that late afternoon the officers set about sorting the scene of destruction with great relish. They comforted women with popcorn in their hair, and men whose trousers were covered with hoof prints. They helped the dishevelled manager of the Lux to his feet, and offered him a cup of hot sweet tea. They called an ambulance for Hazel and saw her off, wrapped in a tartan blanket, gently led away by her father, and they flipped open their notebooks and took down witness statements that would later be filed at the station under mass hysteria, this being a fancy term that police officers used when faced with people who insist that they have seen a green ram wearing a venomous snake on its head in the London cinema, or a man with horns on his head sprinting out of the fire doors the second the lights flick back on. But policemen are just like the rest of us when it comes to a celebrity, and never more so than when that celebrity is young and pretty and happens to be waving a sore but attractive knee about. Consequently, several younger male officers attended upon the sorceress, swarming about her like navy blue bees around a dahlia, and she wasn't happy about it. A butt from a ram, you say, madam, said one officer with a sparkling smile. You'll need a hospital check-up. I will not, snapped Medea. Whereupon a second officer, wearing a concerned expression on his chubby face that made him look like an anxious goldfish, stepped towards. My mum sprained her knee, he added gravely. Knocked down by a llama at a petting zoo, she was. Turned nasty. The sprain, I mean, although the llama was pretty bad-tempered too. By now, of course, Medea's temper could easily have topped the most livid of llamas. Shaken with frustration and unspent rage, her white fingers twitched in her lap, itching for magical revenge. "You're in shock, miss," said the first officer, which was precisely the sort of astute observation for which the British police are famed the world over. However, the reason for Medea's state of mind wasn't one that any police constable anywhere was ever likely to guess. You see, Medea had not been crossed for hundreds and hundreds of years, not since Jason ditched her for glouch and she had been so wrong-footed and humiliated and mad. For it to be at the hands of a couple of children, a ram, and a rabble of grubby sheep was almost intolerable. And so, whilst the other police officers continued to soothe and coax, she carried on scowling and thinking about snails. Specifically, the little brown garden one she planned to turn Alex into before stamping on him with a good leg, dunking Aries back into super-strength bacteria, and giving Rose some much-needed crystal-clear instruction in how to behave. If only the police would get out of her way so that she could find them. "Tango Sierra ambulance assistance requested," said the policewoman with a bright smile. "But I don't want one," insisted Medea. "Calm down, dear," offered the chubby officer. "Everything will be—" But whatever solace the officer was predicting was lost in a loud "oof" as Medea punched him squarely in the face. Reeling, he toppled backwards and vanished in a blur of boots and trousers over the next row of seats. "Madam," the smiling officer's voice was stern. He puffed his chest up in outrage. "There's no need for that." But Medea disagreed and walloped him too. However, please note, it is never, I repeat, never a good idea to punch a policeman, and it's an even more terrible idea to punch two in a row. They simply don't like it. And worse, they'll put you in a police cell to prove it. Which was why 10 minutes later, Medea was led out in handcuffs, scowling and raging to a waiting police car. Whereupon, I'd just like to say, "Hooray! Hooray!" Thank you. Meanwhile, Alex, Rose and Aries had slipped out of the door leading backstage and hurried down corridors cluttered with theatre props to leave the building by the stage door. This led them into a quiet alleyway and from there back into the bustling crowds of Leicester Square, where they discovered the flock being ushered by the RSPCA into a corner of the square's lush gardens, temporarily penned off by the crowd barriers from the premiere. Whilst Alex went to find out where the sheep would be taken to, Aries watched them spill out onto the grass, feeling his heart lift as they demolished rose bushes, weeded in the fountain, and waggled their bottoms at a snooty-looking statue of a man in funny trousers. But it was seeing Toby, sniffing the grass beneath his hooves, round-eyed at the novelty of that, brought a tear to Aries' eye. A tear quickly blinked away as Alex returned to tell them the good news, that since the police hadn't received any reports about a missing flock, the sheep would be taken to the Funky Farm Experience, a petting zoo run by a doting family, set in acres of green pastures with cosy straw-filled barns to sleep in at night. In the time before the trucks arrived, Alex and Aries said goodbye to everyone, several times. "Amazing," muttered one RSPCA man, as a grey-faced Dartmoor knelt down behind the barrier, allowing the dark-haired boy to remove the popcorn boxes from its horns. "Quite astonishing," added another, watching an Icelandic ram nuzzle the girl with the wild red hair. "Extraordinary," added a third, as the green ram tilted its head towards a bumpy-faced ewe, almost as if she were talking to him. But as the trucks rumbled into the square, Rose led Aries away and quickly hid him behind a large hawthorn bush, where his new green colour blended in perfectly, to avoid any awkward questions about why he wasn't boarding the trucks too. Minutes later, as the sunset streaked the London sky with gold, the trucks were ready to leave. It was a scene everyone would remember. After all, it's not every day that you see Leicester Square overrun by sheep. Even fewer when you see a world-famous fashion designer being led away in handcuffs to a waiting police car. And hardly any at all when that same designer is driven past cattle trucks that start to bounce under the stamping hooves of 66 sheep in a deafening roar of bleats that sounds suspiciously like cheering. By 10:20 that evening, Alex and Aries had told the girls about all the terrible things Medea had done with the fleece. Hazel, who was just back from the hospital, had burst into tears several more times. Rose had hugged everyone until they felt better, and the little group had returned to the British Museum. Now, Whilst Medea paced up and down the concrete floor of her police cell across the town, Rose stroked Aries' head, watching the others examine the newly repaired caryatid. Flown back from Greece that same afternoon, the statue now stood on her original plinth in front of the curtain in room 18. Having only just finished repositioning her, the curators had left their scaffolding up on either side, which was lucky really, since it'd make it much easier for Alex and, especially, Aries to clamber back up to the portal. Of course, the museum had closed to the public 3 hours before, but as I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear, Rose's mother was still working in its basement, so that once again Rose had the run of the exhibition rooms. Leaping out from Alex's shoulders, Hex twisted around the caryatid's back, hissing appreciatively. "She's done a remarkable job," said Alex, running his finger over the barely visible joint in the caryatid's neck. "I just hope it's a seamless mend." "It will be," sighed Rose. "Mum's besotted by old relics, remember?" Alex did, and hearing the sadness in her voice, he felt his heart tighten. Turning, he noticed the same resigned expression on Rose's face that he'd seen the first time that she'd spoken about her mother. Of course, he knew that she was sad they were leaving, but now he realised something else, that after they'd gone, her life would go back to normal, to being stuck in the museum alone and waiting around for her mother day after day, unless... He walked over and picked up Rose's rucksack, which lay slumped at her feet. "Aren't you forgetting something?" he said, handing it to her. Rose's eyes widened in excitement. "The scroll!" He watched as she quickly unbuckled the straps, rummaged inside, and plucked out the scroll, thinking for a moment before lifting it to her lips. "Scroll," she began, her voice little more than a whisper. "If my father is still living, please tell me where he is." Which, when you think about it, was a rather clever way to phrase the question. After all, who wants to be led through the jungle to a heap of jaguar chewed bones? The scroll fidgeted. It fluttered its ends. It twitched. It rippled. It made a wet rattling sound as though it was blowing a papery raspberry, and then it became absolutely silent. "Scroll?" urged Alex, trying to ignore the little voice in his head, warning that it might be delaying bad news. "Shh!" the scroll rustled irritably. "I'm trying to think." "Great," sighed Aries, and sank gloomily onto his haunches. "Get comfortable, everybody. It's going to be a long night." And indeed, several minutes dragged past, slow as treacle, dribbling off a spoon. Finally, unable to stand it any longer, Rose lifted the scroll of her trembling hand. "Please?" her voice wavered. Instantly, the scroll sprang open. "Minus 0.833, it announced with a flourish. "What?" Rose's voice was barely audible. "Minus 57.2, added the scroll, flapping its edges in excitement. The others looked at each other blankly. "Maybe it's a code," suggested Alex. "Only where numbers stand for letters of the alphabet, you know, 1 stands for A, and 57, muttered X. Aries tuttered loudly. "Clearly the scroll's as useless as ever. When it's not waffling on in mysterious verses, it's reciting pointless numbers." "Hang on a minute," said Hazel quietly, pulling a smartphone from her bag. The others watched as she began tapping the screen. "Something about those numbers with all their minuses and points sounds just a bit familiar to me." Everyone waited, watching. "I thought so," she cried. "I knew they were the sort of things my pilot talks about when we're tour planning. They're coordinates." "Coordinates?" said Alex blankly. "Numbers," said Rose. "They pinpoint places on a map." "Look," said Hazel, holding out the glowing screen. The others looked to see a single red dot glowing on an illuminated map of a wide river surrounded by green jungle. "It's showing a point way up in the northeast Amazon," added Hazel. "The Amazon, Rose! Didn't you say—" "He's alive!" squealed Rose, leaping up and punching the air. Euphoric, she threw her arms round Alex and Hazel. Aries jammed his head in between them, whilst Hex flicked his tongue into the air, tasting the happiness and looping round their feet. "Oh, Hazel!" cried Rose, her eyes glittering with tears. "Thank you, you're wonderful!" At which the scroll cleared its throat pointedly. "And so are you," added Rose, tickling the scroll in the palm of her hand so that it squealed with laughter. "You papery marvel." Cradling the scroll, she began pacing across the room, thinking out loud. "So I need to find someone who'll take me to look for him. Someone from the Royal Geographical Society, maybe? I mean, they funded his trip in the first place." A frown crossed her face. "Except they gave up looking for him months ago." Hang those old boys, said Hazel. I got a plane, don't I? Rose stared at her. You mean? Sure, nodded Hazel. Least I can do after today, ain't it? Besides, I reckon I'm in need of a vacation after this tour. Oh, squealed Rose, which was really the only sensible thing to say, and everyone jumped up and down a bit more and hugged each other again. For the longest time, the friends embraced again, or at least Alex and Rose and Hazel did, whilst Aries gave everyone an affectionate prod with his horns, and Hex weaved between their ankles. But finally, when they all stepped apart again, pink-faced and happy, there was an awkward silence, one of those bumpy bits of quiet that happen when everyone knows there's a goodbye coming and nobody wants to be the one to say it. Finally, Alex stepped back and picked Hex up from the floor, looping him over his shoulders, and began walking with Aries towards the ramp to the scaffolding. At the top, he lifted the curtain and turned. Goodbye, he smiled, and letting Aries walk through in front of him, stepped inside and let the curtain fall. There was a moment's silence, loaded with a sparkly anticipation that something special was about to happen, before the cloth rumpled up messily, and Aries stuck his head back out. I'll miss you, Rose, he said, blinking back his own tears. Rose sniffed and blew him a kiss. And I'll miss you too, she whispered. I never met proper heroes before. Aries stepped back inside, blushing. The two girls watched the cloth fall back, rippling in the cold breeze before laying flat against the wall. For a moment, the room thrummed with a deafening quiet, suddenly yawning with new emptiness. Come on, little lady, said Hazel, linking arms with Rose. We got us some planning to do. Nodding, Rose swallowed her tears, and together the two girls walked out of room 18, leaving its secrets behind them, into the grand hall where the first splashes of moonlight were painting the floor silver. Do you think they'll throw a party for us? Said Aries, nudging the boy's hand. With Elysian thistles, I mean, and dandelions, and some fresh swags of nettles? He slapped his lips. Ooh, and some wine for you. Maybe, said Alex, uncertainly, stepping through the portal. Behind them, the huge stone door thundered close, sending a rumble around the walls of the cavern. Maybe? Aries looked up at him, puzzled. What I mean, said Alex gently, is that we didn't complete our quest, did we? He rubbed Aries' brow. We don't have the fleece, Aries. Aries turned away and stood his hooves quietly as Alex took the scroll back into his bag and started down the shale-strewn slope towards the sticks. He was halfway to the riverbank when he felt the sharp jab of Aries' horns. But we thwarted her, didn't we? Said Aries brightly. I mean, we saved Hazel, we freed the sheep. Alex, we stopped a sorceress. True, said Alex slowly. And that's more than Jason or Heracles or any of those other tunic twerps managed, isn't it? Well, yes, said Alex. I suppose so. At which Aries shot past him, skittering over the rocks down to the water. I mean, did you hear what Rose called us? He cried over his shoulder. Proper heroes, replied Alex. That's right, said Aries, scuffling to a stop. Hey, do you think Athena will commission statues of us to stand with the other ones in the pavilion? He lifted up a front hoof and stuck it out nobly in front of him. What do you reckon? What's he doing? Muttered Hex, and Alex is striking a hero's pose, smiled Alex, watching Aries spin round to stick out a back hoof instead. As Aries continued to model for the imagined sculptor, Alex picked his way gingerly down the bank and began thinking back over the last few days. Perhaps Rose was right, he reflected. After all, who would have thought that he, Alex, Knossos, Potter and Zookeeper could fight harpies and fauns and cyclopses, or persuade a sorceress's snake intent on killing him to change sides, or rally an army of frightened sheep into action. A hero's crater filled with olives would be nice, added Aries. At the big unveiling, I mean. Or that Aries could accept that his fleece was lost forever, that he was no longer obsessed about how he appeared on the outside, but had become a different and better ram on the inside. Despite the chill winds lifting off the sticks, Alex felt a warm glow round his heart, thinking about Rose's words. More than that, for the first time in his life, and death, he understood the difference between the sort of person who lops the head off monsters for the sake of it, and the sort of person who finds the courage to deep inside themselves to fight for their friends. The difference between one who's born looking fabulous and the one who learns to behave that way. The difference between a Greek hero and a proper one. Not that he was about to share that thought with Aries. Not yet, anyway. After all, there's only so much swaggering and bleating you can put up with on the dusty road back to the underworld. The end.